As the air gets crisp and the holidays get closer, your wardrobe needs to get warmer. It's time to go back to Quince and get those layers, sweaters, outerwear, and everyday essentials that feel luxurious, look timeless, and make holiday dressing effortless. We've been talking about Quince for a while here. I've told you how much I love their pants for travelers. What is your favorite item that you've got from Quince? Let me know. Is it their $50 cashmere sweaters, their Italian wool coats, or something else? By working directly with ethical top-tier factories, Quince skips the middlemen and offers prices 50% less than similar brands. Which Quince pieces have become your go-to layers for the holiday season? Quince has something for everyone on your list. What pieces are you loving right now, whether for gifting or for yourself? Step into the holiday season with layers made to feel good, look polished, and last from Quince. Perfect for gifting or keeping for yourself. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Time. It's always vanishing. The commute, the errands, the work functions, the meetings, selling your car. Unless you sell your car with Carvana. Get a real offer in minutes. Get it picked up from your door. Get paid on the spot. So fast you'll wonder what the catch is. There isn't one. We just respect you and your time. Oh, you're still here? Move along now. Enjoy your day. Sell your car today. Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
Amateur Traveler, episode 970. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about locks and boathouses, riverside pubs and royal palaces, Kew Gardens, and Tower Bridge, as we walk the Thames Path Trail. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about the Thames Path Trail. I would like to welcome back to the show Heather Cowper from heatheronhertravels.com, who has come to talk to us about hiking the Thames Path National Trail in England. Heather, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
I say welcome back. Heather's been on the show twice, we think. Once talking about Volos, Greece, and the Pelion Peninsula, episode 818, and once way back in 2008, talking about Valencia, Spain. So you are talking about a hiking experience this time. What is the Thames Path National Trail?
Well, Chris, as the name suggests, it's a path that actually follows along beside the River Thames. It's a long-distance trail. It's about 300 kilometres, 185 miles long. And I walked it with my sister last year over the course of more or less a whole year because we were doing it in bits. But it's a trail that takes you through the south of England and ends up in London. So it's from the source, which is in Gloucestershire, in rural Gloucestershire in the Cotswolds, to the mouth of the Thames estuary when you get to London. It's got a lot to see along the way, which I'm sure we're going to talk about.
And is there a quick why should someone hike the Thames Path National Trail?
There are some people like me who are avid walkers and love to do a national trail, a long distance trail, and I've done a few, and this was a very enjoyable one. I think this particular trail takes you through the south of England, and you really do see some quintessentially English landscapes. You've got really beautiful rural landscapes, and then as you come towards London, you've got some of the most iconic landmarks in England. So there's that. But also, it's one of the hiking trails that I've done that I've found to be the most flexible and easy to access, in that it's a 15-day trail and you can do it as a whole thing. But it's also the kind of trail that has a lot of good transport options along the way. And so you can dip in and out on it. You can do a few days of it. You could attach it to some sightseeing in London. So there's lots of different ways you can experience it. And then the other thing is that I read somewhere that there was some research done to say that when you're in an environment which is green and blue, In other words, the green of
Mm-hmm.
nature and the blue of water. That combination is particularly relaxing, tranquil, very good for your mental health and well-being, which I think is another great little bonus for this particular trail.
Excellent. You said blue, and I automatically went to blue of sky. But of course, we're talking about England, so that's not always going to be the case.
No, although I'd say the best time to walk it is probably the spring through to the autumn or the fall and through the summer months. But you do get good weather, and you don't necessarily want to have baking hot weather to walk a trail like this. Yeah.
Excellent. Where do we start?
If you want to walk the whole trail, you can do that. But what I found, and I walked it in stages, is mentally as I was walking the various parts of the trail, and we walked it from the source and we ended up in London, I broke it down into 4 stages because the landscape, as you can imagine, changes all the way along the length of the trail. So perhaps if I just give you a bit of an overview of
Sure.
these kind of 4 sections. I've actually written 4 separate articles with a lot of detail of each one. But just to give you an idea of what you see generally along each stage, and then if you want, we could dip into some of the more detail about the things along the way. The first stage, when we started at the source, and the source, to be honest, is just like a little muddy puddle in a field. There's nothing more grand about it than that. There is a little signpost that says Thames Source, but that's about it. So this section, the first 4 days of walking, takes you from the source in Gloucestershire near a place called Kemble. And it would take you to Oxford, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know Oxford. It's an amazing old university city. So this section is very rural, very green. At this point, you're often just walking by what is quite a small stream. And until you're about 2 days into the walk, I wouldn't say it really feels like a proper river at all. It's more of a stream with some kind of lakes that you might pass, small lakes. And then a couple of days in, you get to Lechlade, and it really is starting to feel like a proper river. This is the point when it becomes navigable, so you get a lot more boats on the river.
That quickly.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
And so it's a very green, verdant, you're walking through water meadows. It's very much a kind of rural experience with some small towns and villages. So then once you're through Oxford, which is an amazing place to visit, you start to get a sense of the river becoming a real way for people to trade, for people to transport goods, because at this point it was the way that goods were transported from the Cotswolds, which was a very wealthy producer of food and agricultural products in centuries gone by, and they would be transported down to London. So in this second section, the days 5 to 8, shall we say, you're starting to see some of the bigger towns that built up along the riverbank based on this trade. You still have really beautiful rural, quite isolated sections, but you've got a lot more bigger towns. There's still beautiful architecture. You've got Oxford, places like Abingdon, which was built around a medieval abbey. And then that takes you down to Henley, which is, I'd say, where the river starts to change again in character, in that you're starting to get a little bit more into the kind of suburbs as you move towards London. And Henley itself is very famous for its rowing regatta, which I've actually been to, which happens in July.
Okay.
So that's the kind of second 4-day section. And then when you get into the next part of the walk, which I'd say is from Henley down to Kingston, which is actually one of the suburbs of London, you're really getting into the more urban landscape, the rivers flowing towards London. And this area is quite interesting because in the 19th century, the railway actually stretched out from London around the 1840s. The Great Western Railway was built from London to Bristol, where I live. And At that time, that railway stretched along the area that we're talking about, and it really gave access to people from London to come out for the day or even to move out. It was the Victorian era when people could actually live further out of London and take the train in. So the river at that point was quite a place of leisure activity. It was really popular to get the train out to some of these towns like Marlow and Henley to watch rowing regattas, to have a day out by the river or on the river. And so as you're walking along this stretch, you're often seeing quite attractive Victorian and Edwardian architecture from the 1850s onwards, pretty boat houses, and also some quite interesting attractions that you can see. For instance, big houses were built because it was close enough to London and more accessible. And
Right.
then the fourth section that I think of is as you come into London from the London suburbs, which takes you through some of the most beautiful suburbs of London by the river, Kew, Richmond, where I actually grew up. And in this area, because of its proximity to London, you've got a real wealth of historic attractions like Hampton Court, you've probably heard of, the famous palace that everyone knows because of Henry VIII. And you've got Kew Gardens. So as you come into London, you pass all these landmarks, and then you get to what I'd call the real hotspot of London along the South Bank, Tower Bridge. And then the final day is walking out of that kind of tourist hotspot, if you like, into East London, which has been developed in the Docklands area, but it
Right.
still has
Sure.
a character of the industrial past of London. So that kind of gives you a bit of an overview of this changing landscape you get from the very rural to the very urban, which I think is quite an interesting feature of this particular trail.
Okay. Should we go back to the Cotswolds and do it now a
Yeah,
little slower?
yeah, sure. So if you want to think of it a bit more day to day, perhaps if I pick out of each of the sections that I've given you that kind of high level view of
Yeah.
some of the things that you would see, the kind of highlights, I'd say that the first section, which is really quite rural, it's really all about being in nature. There are a few nature reserves along the way, and you're really walking through these water meadows a lot of the time where the river curves around and round. And in the curves, you've got these water meadows, and there's real havens for wildlife, beautiful wildflowers. There's a nature reserve there called Chimney Reserve, I think, where there was a bird hide. And it's an area that was very prosperous in the Middle Ages. So you tend to get,
And this is Chimney Meadows.
yes, that's just one of the nature reserves that you get.
Got it.
You also get towns like Lechlade, for instance, which is really a quintessential Cotswold town where you might spend the night because where you break the second day's journey. That's a very pretty Cotswold town. And another attraction, I'd say, along that stretch, there's a manor house called Kelmscott Manor, which I actually went back and visited recently for the day because I hadn't had a proper chance to see it when I was walking past it, but it is literally right by the river. And it's the home of William Morris, who you may have heard of. He was a textile designer in, I think, the 1840s, 1850s, and he had a house in London. But he almost represents the arts and crafts movement, and this was his country house. So you can visit that, and it's got very beautiful interiors, which are really decorated in the style that they were when he lived there. And then, of course, you reach Oxford, and Oxford is probably a place that warrants you stopping for a day if you're really interested in that and haven't seen Oxford, ancient city, university city, multiple colleges, each of which is like a mini university in itself. The beautiful buildings used in many films, Harry Potter film sets and other TV dramas. That's obviously a beautiful place to visit, which many people would want to stop at. So that would be a bit more detail. But I'd say this first section up to Oxford is really all about the nature, the wildlife, and it probably would really appeal to people who enjoy bird watching, perhaps. There's a lot of wildlife
Okay.
and bird life along the river. So as you come through Oxford, you're going through a series of larger towns. I would say Abingdon is one that I mentioned, Wallingford is another. Each of these are places that you can stop and they have sights to see. I think what I found was that when we were walking, each day probably took us about 6 to 8 hours of walking. And so if you're particularly interested in some of the historical sites along the way, it's probably best to build that into your itinerary, to either walk a shorter half day one day and then spend the other half of the day sightseeing, or just add on an extra day.
So that path up to Oxford, 6 to 8 hours a day walking, is then 4 days.
Exactly.
So it'd be easy then to say, I want to spend a day in Oxford. Now it's 5 days. I want to spend a day stopping and seeing the manor house. Now suddenly that's turned into a week-long.
Yes, exactly. As some of the other things in this second section between Oxford and Henley, you've got some beautiful locks, because this was an area where the trade was going through and the river changes level as it goes towards London. So you have locks where the canal boats that were used to transport goods in the past, or nowadays they're used as a leisure fun thing to do. You see the canal boats going through these locks. There's lots of pretty boat houses to see along the river. I think those are the main things to see in that section of the river between Oxford and Henley.
If you're one of those guys who looks at hair loss as a way to wear cool caps and save on shampoo, then good on you. But a lot of us take it a little more personally than that. It makes us feel like we're getting old and less attractive. If you're trying to figure out what actually works, through HIMS, you can get to Clear Solutions expert guidance and online process to take the confusion out of care. HIMS offers convenient access to a range of prescription hair loss treatments with ingredients that work. Doctor-trusted, clinically proven ingredients can stop further hair loss and regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. For simple online access to personalized and affordable care for hair loss, ED, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/travel. That's hims.com/travel for your free online visit. hims.com/travel. Individual results may vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Featured products include compound drug products which the FDA does not approve or verify for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. See website for full details, restrictions, and important safety information. And thanks to HIMS for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. You're standing on the beach when you notice something strange. The horizon doesn't look right. At first, all you can see is a thin white line. Then the line starts to rise. You realize it's not the horizon at all. It's a 30-foot tall wall of water, and it's racing straight toward you. What would you do? On the day after Christmas in 2004, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake hit off the coast of Indonesia, triggering a devastating tsunami. It struck Thailand without warning, no alarms, no cell phone alerts, no evacuation. In this season of Against the Odds, experience one of the deadliest natural disasters in history through the perspectives of those who did everything they could to survive. Follow Against the Odds on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge on all episodes of Against the Odds, Tsunami in Thailand, early and ad-free right now on Wondery Plus.
So the bit from Henley to Kingston, just to go into it in a bit more detail, you've got, if I talk about some of the places you might want to stop, in Cookham, which is a really pretty small town right by the river, there's a lovely gallery that is dedicated to the painter Stanley Spencer. He's probably a bit of a niche English artist who was working in the 40s and 50s, so probably not well known. But there's a very pretty little gallery, and it's interesting because he really painted very typical English scenes from the villages around them. But he used the faces of the people he saw and the characters of the people he saw, but he wove them into different scenes. So one of his famous paintings, which I think is in the Tate Art Gallery in London, is a kind of scene of Jesus preaching to his apostles, but they're all on a punt or they're all on a rowing boat in the middle of the Thames. And the faces of all the apostles are actually the faces of the people that he knew from the village. So it's quite fun in that point of view, in that he's weaving the river, the scenes from the river and what he knew with other different themes. On that section, you also pass what was a stately home called Cliveden, and that was the home of the Astor family. It's built overlooking the river near Maidenhead, and they were very famous in their day for great entertainments, and all the great and the good went there, and also for the Profumo scandal, which was a political scandal in the 1960s.
That is not one I know.
No, you probably would if you were English. But anyway, it's run by the National Trust, who runs a lot of historic properties in England. So it's one you can visit, the house and the gardens. The house, sorry, is actually a luxury hotel, but you can visit the gardens. So you pass that. You also do pass on that stretch Windsor Castle, which I'm sure your readers will be aware of. And that is obviously one of the royal palaces.
And also where the current House of Windsor took their name from.
Exactly, yes.
Oddly enough, it's not named after the House of Windsor, but they are named after the house.
Exactly,
because
yes.
the original name was a little too German when England was fighting a war with Germany. So
That's right. And it's got a very famous chapel where many of the royals were married. And also very nearby there, you don't necessarily see it, but Eton College is one of the famous...
that's for Eton. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the famous, we say public schools, but that actually is a privately run school.
I've never understood why you seem to have those words reversed. But
yes, but it's quite well known for its rowing, actually, because they do have their own rowing course there. And then also on this section, you pass Runnymede, which is another historic site. It's not actually that much to see, although there is a little information centre there. But it's actually where in 1215, King John of England, he was overreaching himself, and his nobles and barons started rebelling and took him in hand. And this is where they made a famous meeting, and the Magna Carta was signed, which was a document which basically constrained the power of the monarchy. So that's another famous historic site that might be interesting to some people. So that's that section from Henley to Kingston, which is days 9 to 12. And then the section from Kingston as you go into London has a wealth of historic places that you can visit. And I think part of this is because from the 16th century, the royal family, the monarchy, lived in London, but they had palaces all along the river because at that time the River Thames was the main thoroughfare, the main way of getting around. Travel by road was extremely difficult. So they tended to build their palaces where they could escape to the country and the restrictions of court life by building palaces along the river. So the most famous of those is Hampton Court, but there were other palaces. For instance, at Richmond, there's no longer a palace, but there used to be a very large Tudor palace, no longer exists. And at Kew, where there's the Kew Gardens, the botanical gardens, it was also a residence originally of the royal family.
I did not know that.
Yeah, in Georgian times. So one of the buildings within the botanical gardens is the house which the royal family used as a little retreat. Yeah, and also what's quite interesting is in the 17th century, a lot of poets and writers, the wealthier ones, let's say, who had time and money for this kind of leisure pursuit, they would build houses along the riverbank in this part of the outskirts of London, which was then the rural escape, but now it's actually suburbs of London. So you would pass, for instance, places like Ham House, which it wasn't actually a royal palace, but it's a beautiful Georgian mansion, probably built at the time when the family there was serving the royal family in their palace at Richmond, I imagine. You've got Kew Gardens, which I mentioned, which is an amazing botanical garden. Richmond itself, where I personally grew up, is a lovely riverside town with lots to see. It's got a park, a large park, and a very pretty riverside frontage.
But more people are familiar with Richmond just recently because of Ted Lasso.
Yes.
Has really put that on the map for a lot of people outside of England.
That's right. To be honest, I was really aware of that, but I have not seen any of Ted Lasso, the series, and I keep meaning to do it because I'm sure I would spot all the favourite spots that I know. I gather the Cricketers Pub on Richmond Green and as a favourite haunt, and all the little lanes, the pretty little lanes around the area that actually was originally the old palace. And there are some very pretty riverside pubs there. Very scenic bridge. So yeah, it's a very nice spot. And probably, again, another place where if you wanted to explore this area and have a rest day from your walking, you could stop there. And then as we come into London itself, you've got a wealth of landmarks because you first of all pass Battersea Power Station, which was, as the name suggests, it was a power generation for London. Then it was derelict for a long time. Now it's a very fancy complex of shops and residences, which has developed only in the last few years. You come into the stretch where it's just one London landmark after another. You've got the South Bank, you've got the London Eye, you've got Southwark Cathedral, you've got Tower Bridge. It's like a hotspot of London.
When you're at the Eye, you're right across from Parliament and
and Big Ben.
Parliamentary Clock Tower, or Big Ben, as people erroneously call it.
Yes, yeah. In that part, you are really wading through tourists. So if your aim is to have a very peaceful English rural experience, I will probably stick to the sections which are further out of London. But it's really good to know that if you're doing some sightseeing in London, the path does stretch all along past all these London landmarks. And perhaps you can go out of London and start back in Kingston, because you can easily get the train there and work your way back. It's a nice complementary experience to some of this sightseeing, shall we say. You can actually see some of the suburbs of London which are by the river and are really attractive, and get that combination of experiences. And then the final section of the Thames Path actually continues past Tower Bridge, and it takes you through this area, which is the Docklands area. It was the original Docklands where goods were landed from all over the world. And Canary Wharf is probably the best known place in that, which is built up with high-rise office complexes. But the name actually originally came from the goods that were landed from the Canary Islands. And
okay. I don't know why I've never put that together. So did we cross the Thames at Tower Bridge? Because the Docklands is north of the river.
In general, you stay on the south side of the river, but at that point you can go on either side. And it's actually really easy to cross because there's a number of bridges and there's sometimes ferries that take you across. Within London, it's slightly interchangeable. It doesn't really matter. You tend to walk on the south side, but if you want to cross to the north side to see some landmarks, it's very easy to do. But this final stretch is quite interesting because what I found was after we past Tower Bridge, it was like within 5 minutes the crowds had melted away, and I felt I was really seeing another side of London, the side of industrial London, the pre-war industrial London, when the London Docklands were really thriving with goods coming in via the river. They were being landed at all these different wharfs, and often you get an apartment building, which has obviously been developed in the last 20 or 30 years, and it has the name of this wharf or that wharf, and it gives you a clue to the history of the things that were being brought in there, because each wharf would specialise in one particular thing. And you also then pass through Greenwich, which is another big landmark and very well worth a visit. It's the site of the Old Royal Naval College, which was the base of the Navy from the days when England ruled the waves. So it's got some very beautiful buildings, some historic sites within that complex. And then the path actually ends just beyond the Thames Barrier, which is an amazing feat of
Okay.
engineering because it controls the flow of the Thames. So whereas there was a big threat in the past of flooding within London, that threat is very much under control now because of the Thames Barrier. So you can see that. And then just beyond is Woolwich, which is Woolwich Arsenal. And again, as the name suggests, it was the arsenal where all the munitions were kept for the Navy and the Army. And that's where the path ends. And I think you can actually continue, but then you'd be continuing into Essex. So that's where the path officially ends. Lots of sights to see, particularly in that area around London.
A couple of questions for you, logistics. So I see pictures of you walking the path, you and your sister, and you're obviously not carrying big backpacks, you're carrying day packs.
Yeah.
So are you just really light packers, or are you sending your luggage ahead with some sort of service to your next inn or something?
We didn't personally do that because we're locals. And so what
Yeah.
we did was we did it over an extended period of time, about a year. And what we did was we treated it as like a weekend project. And so we
Okay.
would walk for a couple of days. Sometimes we would use public transport to get around, and we would leave our luggage in one place and then we'd get the bus and then walk back or something like that. Or sometimes we would use our cars to position ourselves so we could leave our luggage in the car. I think that's something that's possible if you are in the UK and you're local and you can manage the logistics of it as we did. But I think probably those who are coming from overseas, probably most of your listeners who, if they were thinking of doing this self-contained trip, there are definitely services that you can use. And the best way to find them is on the National Trails website, which has a big section on the
Got it.
Thames
Yep.
Path.
We'll have a link for that.
That's the official website, shall we say. There is a list of companies that provide that service. I think there's at least a couple that, number one, do offer that service of carrying your baggage from place to place. Obviously, it comes at a cost. But secondly, there are a number of companies that offer holiday packages where they would put together the whole trip for you, and
Got
they
it.
would
Okay.
book the places to stay along the way. And then as part of that service, they would transport your baggage from place to place. Because by road, actually, some of these, the start and end of each day's walk is probably only 30 to 40 minutes apart.
Right. The river does a lot of looping,
Yes,
especially as you get down towards London.
it does. It definitely does. Yeah. So I think I'd probably recommend for those people who really don't want to figure out the logistics themselves to use a holiday company. And typically what they're doing is putting together a self-guided package.
Yep.
So
Yep.
you wouldn't need a person to guide you in any shape or form on this particular trail because it's extremely easy to follow. You're basically following the course of the river. You can't go far wrong, and it's actually really well signposted along the way. Although I would possibly recommend that people get a guidebook and give you the details. The one we used was Trailblazer Guide, which we found really useful. And that gives you a bit more context to what you're seeing along the way. It gives you instructions. You don't really need the instructions to stop you getting lost, but more to let you know what you're seeing along the way.
And that I
Yeah.
assume is broken down by mile markers or something like that.
Yeah, the guidebooks break the trail down into the 15-day walk that I've more or less described to you. And in the same way that I break it into those sections in the articles that I've written on my blog, where I've also given quite a lot of detail about bus routes or how you'd get to the start or the finish if you wanted to pick and choose the routes. So 15 days, I think, is the standard. You could do it a bit quicker, but then I think it wouldn't be quite so enjoyable because you wouldn't be able to have those relaxing moments sitting by the riverbank, a riverside pub, having a nice coffee or a drink, or it wouldn't be quite so relaxing. I think that would be for more, to do it in less than 15 days would be for the kind of real walking enthusiast.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Gift magical mornings with Nespresso Virtuo Pop. Compact and stylish, Virtuo Pop is made to meet every morning coffee craving. From espresso to coffee, hot or iced, at the click of a button. And celebrate the season with Nespresso's limited edition coffee flavors. Sweet almond and hibiscus, cinnamon and candied tamarind, and festive double espresso. Magic in the making. Shop the holiday gift collection exclusively at Nespresso.com.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the Dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
But having said that, there's really no reason why you have to do all 15 days, because I think it's, as I said at the beginning, it's a trail that really lends itself to dipping in and out of it, or and some sections are prettier than others or have more to see than others. So it depends what you're looking for.
And as you were doing it in 4 different segments, is the way your blog posts break down, were you using a service or were you just using a guidebook, or how were you picking where you were going to stay, for instance?
I use the guidebook to guide me as to what the start and the finish of
each day would be.
Of each day would be. And then I just booked my accommodation independently. And that's really all you need to book is the accommodation. And generally, just if we talk about the practicalities of the accommodation side, typically at the start and finish of each day, you're ending in a small town. And usually there's a choice of a few places to stay. There's 1 or 2 sections where there is literally only one place to stay, but that's literally only 1 or 2, and those you do have to book ahead. But generally you've got a choice of 3 or 4 places to stay, and sometimes in places like Oxford or Windsor, you've got multiple places. And typically we ended up staying in pubs or inns, or sometimes bed and breakfasts, because for us, our interest was in, I'm the first one to love a luxury or boutique hotel. But when you're walking, generally what you want is somewhere clean, comfortable, not hugely expensive at the end of the day, where you know you're going to get a meal. And so that a lot of the pubs in England do have accommodation above them, or there are guest houses. And in each place at the end of the day, these small towns or larger villages, there's inevitably a pub, a restaurant, usually a couple of choices at the very least of places you can go and eat. And there's almost always a convenience store where you can buy some provisions for a picnic. And just thinking about the logistics of what you need to take, you don't actually have to take a picnic, but we generally did.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah. So what we would do is we'd buy a sandwich or a few bits and pieces that we were going to have for a picnic from the convenience store before we left. And what we would tend to do is maybe stop for coffee at a nice pub mid-morning. This is the sort of reason I don't recommend rushing, because you want to enjoy it. We would probably stop then at lunchtime to have our picnic, try and find a nice scenic spot by the river. And then in the afternoon, if we passed a tea room or a cafe that served cold drinks, we might stop there as well. So that was a nice way of breaking up 6-7 hours walking, which is what it would typically be. But if you're not the sort of person who wants to be bothered with making your own picnic or taking anything, there are pubs on every stretch. There are multiple places to stop, riverside pubs, which are very attractive places to stop and have a bite to eat and a drink if you need something.
In your day bag, you were bringing your picnic lunch, your rain gear, I would suspect.
Yes.
What else were you packing?
That's about it, really. I always carry a small medical kit and a few other odds and ends. But if you have your luggage carried, or if you are leaving it somewhere and then returning by public transport to your base, as it were, you don't really need to carry a lot of stuff, just maybe a change of socks or something in case your feet get wet. One thing that we might talk about is the considerations of the time of year to go. And I just want to mention the fact that the Thames, being a river, can rise and fall and can be affected by rainfall. So you do need to be aware of flooding along the Thames. And it very much depends on the time of year that you go. And when we started, we did start in early spring, and we hadn't quite realised that there was this flooding issue. So in retrospect, we realised that probably it would be better to do your walking between, let's say, May and September, unless you're in the parts near London where it is very well paved. But when you get heavy rainfall, the water meadows do flood. Surprisingly, that's their function, because they're usually left unbuilt on historically because they're in a bend in the river, and that bend in the river is the area that is likely to flood, and it acts as a sponge to soak up the water.
Right.
And so people don't build there. And sometimes it does flood, and that particularly happens in winter, early spring, in the more rural areas closer to the source. So that is something that you probably do need to be aware of. And even further downriver, when there's been either a high tide, because the river is tidal up to a certain point, or where there's been a lot of heavy rainfall, we did find in places that the river was actually lapping over the towpath, the riverside paths. There are websites that you can look at to check what the flooding risk is, whether there's been a flooding in the area, or if it's been raining heavily in the days before you plan to go. It's worth just checking that.
Got it. Anything else we need to know before we start hiking on the Thames River path here?
I think I'd just say that it's a very easy path, because as you can imagine, it's not mountainous. There isn't really too many ups and downs. I wouldn't say that it's accessible, as in accessible to a kind of wheelchair user or a buggy, except possibly the London areas where it is flat tarmac path. But it is very easy. So it's one that I'd say, if you fancy trying a bit of a long distance trail, or just walking for a few days, but you're a bit uncertain about your fitness level, it's a really good one to try, because you can easily dip in and out. And if you get stuck, you can get public transport from most places along its route. So it's a very easy trail, and it's a really good one to start.
Okay. And you were doing, 300 kilometer trail, 15 days. So the average is 20 kilometers a day.
Yes, your maths is very good. I'd actually written this down because I had a quick look, and we actually walked between 20 and 25 kilometers. So the length does vary a bit. 20 to 25 kilometers, that's 12 to 16 miles. And that took us, because we would probably spend an hour to an hour and a half on our rest stops. That would take us between 6 and 8 hours. 8 hours would be a really long day. 6 hours, 6 to 7 hours would probably be a typical day, nicely broken up with stops along the way to just relax.
Excellent. Did you have a favorite day of the 15? I know you didn't do them all at the same time, but your favorite section?
One of the favourites would be the area around Oxford. Oxford itself is a lovely place, but we didn't actually stop there. But the section as you come into Oxford is very attractive. And as you leave Oxford and you're going towards Henley, that is just a very pretty part of the path. And it has a lot of riverside pubs because it's close to the university town. I have memories of walking out from Oxford, and because being a university town, there's a lot of cycling. They use the towpaths to cycle. So walking along and having a ring on the bell as a bike would whiz by beside me. And then as you get out of Oxford, you have these beautiful water meadows, which have been grazed for centuries. And then you'll come round a bend in the river and you'll see ladies gently doing breaststroke in a little swimming spot under the willows in a part of the Thames. And it's just a very pretty, scenic area. As you go downstream, there are a lot of locks that I mentioned, which the English locks are something to behold. These locks where the water levels change and the canal boats go through, because they all have a lock keeper who's generally resident in the little house that's by the lock. And they seem to have this competition of growing the most colourful and attractive gardens. So they're usually full of colour, so full of beautiful English country flowers, and they're just very peaceful, and you go through one after the other, and they're all lovely places if you want to stop, and you can watch the canal boats going by. So I think that was one of my favourite memories of those particular sections, but there are many pretty sections, I'd say, along the Thames.
Excellent. Anything else before we get to our wrap-up questions?
I can't think of anything, but
excellent. You were standing in the prettiest spot along the whole route. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
It would probably be one of those areas where the locks are. And I remember one that was, I can't remember the name of it, but we came across it and it had all the hollyhocks and the English flowers, and it was so colourful, the geraniums. It was like they were putting on a display just for us. And it just so happened that the lockkeeper had a little kiosk as well selling ice cream. So that was even better. I think those locks are so pretty to sit and have your picnic and watch the canal boats go through. There's something quite relaxing and therapeutic about watching someone going slowly through, and the water rises, and then they have to open the gate, and then they have to close the gate. And you think, oh, that's great. They're doing the work, not me. But you're really watching a typical river scene.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say, only along the Thames River path?
I think I probably told you one, which was that sort of thing around Oxford of the bikes going by and the rural scene juxtaposed with the urban scene. But maybe another one would be Tower Bridge, where, as I mentioned, you just walked through this complete tourist hotspot of wading your way through people trying to take that perfect photo of the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben, and you think, oh my goodness, the crowds. And then you pass Tower Bridge, and then 10 minutes later, the crowds melt away and you're in a completely different feel of London, the old London of probably the pre-war London, or a sense of it, the old wharfs, and really areas that are quite derelict and run down as you go through the East End, still goes by the river, that are quite undeveloped. And that was another Thames moment, probably contrasting with some of the more natural and the rural green water meadows side of the Thames.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize the whole trip, the whole route, in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I'd say nature would be one, because of this beautiful green scenery that you're walking through, the birds and the wildflowers. I'd say relaxing as well. There's something very relaxing about walking along, under trees and willows and just seeing the water drifting by. And scenic as well, because it's really very pretty towns, pretty villages. And then, of course, the London landmarks, which was the end for us. So, yeah, those would be my 3 words.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Heather Cowper from heatheronhertravels.com. I'll have links in the show notes to all, you say 4 posts, it's really 5 posts. There's the overview post about this particular trail so that you can easily find those. We'll encourage you to go to her site and read those. Heather, thanks so much for coming back on Amateur Traveler and talking to us about your love for the Thames River National Path.
Thank you for having me, Chris, and I hope I've inspired a few listeners to walk this lovely trail.
Don't miss a special offer on November 19th from Botox Cosmetic Anabotulinum Toxin A, the one and only product of its kind FDA approved for over 20 years. Buy one $50 gift card and get one free while supplies last. Terms and conditions apply. For prescribing information and box warning, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If you're interested in learning about how you can become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/Amateur Traveler. Just 30 more episodes till the 1,000th episode. Give me your feedback for what you'd like to see the show look like in the future. Go to amateurtraveler.com/1000. I am just back from China, and please excuse if my voice is not 100%, but I think I picked up some bug on the way back in 24 hours of traveling. I think there's only one new blog post on Amateur Traveler since we last talked, and that's a review of two of Gilroy's 50-year-old wineries, A Taste of Gilroy Heritage, Fortino, and Hecker Pass wineries. If you're interested in traveling with me to Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan next May, it is about 6 months away, and it's time to get your reservation in. If you're interested, there are still spots available. Either go to amateurtraveler.com/trips to learn more, or just drop me an email. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.